Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we've got a couple of updates on the Model S and Model X. We also have a big announcement from General Motors, a couple of things on the Cybertruck, and more. Well, the tough week continues in the markets for Tesla, down 5% on the day-to-day, closing at $172.92, while the Nasdaq was down just over 2% on the day. Tomorrow we will get unemployment numbers for February. Today we did get initial jobless claims for the week. Those came in at 211,000, higher than last week, a little bit higher than expectations. Remember, softer employment numbers could lead to less aggressive interest rate changes, but employment is strong enough right now that probably not a significant factor, at least without a bigger variance in those jobs numbers. All right, getting into the Tesla news, kind of a quiet news day, but we do have a couple of significant updates on the Model S and Model X. In celebration of the stock price performance this week, Tesla has introduced a new ultra red color for the S and the X. This is a $3,000 option in the United States, and it does replace the previous multi-coat red that was a $2,500 option on the S and the X, but that same multi-coat red is still the red for the 3 and the Y. So it's been a really long time since we have seen an updated color from Tesla on the S and the X. Obviously, the Y is from Berlin getting new colors, but outside of that, the palette has been the same for a while, so these cars coming out of Fremont, interesting to see this color change. Ultra red does seem to be somewhere in between the midnight cherry red that we see in Berlin and the old multi-coat red. Seems a fair amount deeper in color than that, maybe a little bit glossier. But it's always a little bit hard to tell how this is going to end up looking in person. I don't think we've got a ton of shots on this yet. Ryan McCaffrey from Ride the Lightning podcast, always recommend that, but he tweeted a photo today that he is saying is the new ultra red. And even in overcast skies, it does still seem to be a pretty poppy and bright red, and obviously very shiny in this photo as well. Right now, Tesla is saying that this is exclusive for the S and the X, so we'll see if this eventually makes its way over to the 3 and the Y, but at least for the moment, Tesla not communicating that intent. On top of the new color, Tesla also announced a couple of recent updates on the S and the X. They say that the glass roof now weighs less and actually lets in 5 times more light than before with the same amount of ultraviolet protection. It seems to be implied that this is for the S and the X, so we'll have to wait and see if that carries over to the 3 and the Y. Obviously, Tesla would want to save weight there too, as long as there's not an additional cost. Unfortunately, Tesla doesn't tell us how much weight they save, but they do point out that because this is weight savings near the top of the vehicle, it does help lower the center of gravity. Tesla here also points out that the Plaid S and X come with improved brake pads with higher thermal capacity for better overall braking performance. I think this has been marketed on the design studio since mid-January, and I'm not sure if there's been any comparison testing done, at least none that I have seen, but I know Plaid owners and customers follow that a little bit more closely. And then of course, Tesla also notes that the round steering wheel is now an option, which we have previously talked about. So lots going on with the S and the X with these changes, with Hardware 4 starting to make appearances, with the recent price cuts. Seems like it might be a decent time to buy. All right, moving on, we've got a couple of things here on the Cybertruck. First, Tesla has added new job listings to their site for Cybertruck positions in Giga Texas. Looks like there are 30 different positions listed at the moment, more than we have seen before, primarily engineering positions. Really fun to see the staff being put in place as we can now start to be a lot more confident counting in months rather than years from the Cybertruck. Adam Jonas from Morgan Stanley also put a note out today covering the Cybertruck. They still have a $220 price target overweight rating. No changes there, but this note with the interesting title of Has Tesla Outgrown the Cybertruck? It reads, quote, "From our discussions with clients, we feel there may be some room to manage expectations about the significance of the Cybertruck within Tesla's Master Plan 3. We regularly speak with clients who believe Tesla may sell many hundreds of thousands of Cybertrucks annually. We think it will more likely be an enthusiast/cult car with far more limited volume, closer to 50,000 units per year, with some design and manufacturing learnings that could ultimately migrate to the rest of Tesla's core lineup," end quote. So 50,000 a year, probably a shockingly low number for most of the listeners here. Elon in the past has said 250, 300,000 a year or so. It's been a long time. Tesla could change plans, but I don't see any major reason to do that. We have heard rumors that Tesla's dedicating, half of the area there at Giga Texas for Cybertruck. Who knows if that's the case, but after all this time for that to come in around the volume of one of Model S or Model X just doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially when you think about the value to price equation. Obviously, we don't have that final set of numbers from Tesla. Price will go up, but for what it offers, I think it's going to be extremely competitively priced. There should be a lot of value there, and I think that's probably what Jonas is sort of forgetting about, just since it's been so long since that unveiling. And we just haven't heard Tesla talk about any of that because they're not trying to sell the car right now. I think Jonas is kind of setting those things aside and just looking at the vehicle itself and saying, okay, how many of these things are really going to be sold? He talks about how it's really emblematic of Tesla as a company and their willingness to push boundaries, but then says, quote, "At the same time, we encourage our readers to ask themselves, how many Cybertrucks can roll up to a parent-teacher conference or youth soccer match at the same time before losing some of that indescribable something," end quote. I think it's a decent point worth considering. Certainly some of the appeal initially for the Cybertruck is just how different it is. But you also have to consider that for many people, that's actually a detriment. So as some of that uniqueness naturally wears off with more vehicles and more time, the decline in appeal and that factor probably offset by the decline in deterrence for a lot of people that just feel like, oh, it's too different, it's too weird. Ultimately, Tesla's job is just to prove that this is a better choice than possible other choices. I think that's where the value comes in, and I think that's where Jonas is just forgetting about and underappreciating that part of it because we just haven't heard much about it for the last few years. Hopefully we'll start to get more of that information soon, but in the meantime, we did get a tidbit here from Jonas who said that at Investor Day, their test driver said that the Cybertruck weighs around 7,000 pounds. All right, moving on, we've got an update today from General Motors, who has filed an 8K that's announced that they have created a voluntary separation program for some employees, which they say is being done in an effort to accelerate the normal attrition process and the resulting cost savings. So stuff like this, not terribly uncommon for companies that have been around a long time, have had employees that have worked at the company for a long time and have gotten raises. Sometimes companies feel like they can do something like this, encourage those employees to leave the company, then replace them with cheaper workers and or just reduce headcount. In general, probably the further ahead you plan for things like that, the better, the less drastic the actions need to be. And this is a pretty sizable action from GM. They say in connection with the voluntary separation program, the company expects to incur up to $1.5 billion of pre-tax employee separation charges, which will be substantially all cash based, and then up to $300 million in pre-tax non-cash pension curtailment charges. So this will hit GM's cash flow, it'll hit their earnings. Of course, we'll have adjusted earnings numbers that back those things out. But I don't know, it seems like with a lot of these automakers, every year we get some new special adjustment, which while those things themselves exactly may not be repeating, so you might want to take a look at the business without them, there's something that is causing a lot of these changes to happen. And it turns out the thing or the things that are causing that are probably here to stay. This will also obviously create a lot of reorganization for GM that can be chaotic. Some organizations, some leaders can better handle that than others. And it also creates uncertainty in the organization. Oftentimes you do a voluntary separation program first, take a look at how everything comes in from that. And then if you're not at your targets, well, then that's when you start to do further layoffs. So something like this is probably the right course of action for GM. They obviously need to make some changes, but it's also a telling sign of where they're at. And it's also happening at a very interesting time as later this year they head into negotiations again already. Seems like we were just talking about this, but negotiations again with the UAW. I think there was a lot of writing on the wall already back in 2019, but I think there's going to especially be a lot of fear, a lot of concern with the UAW this time around. They could be, probably should be in for a very difficult round of negotiations. So a lot to keep an eye on there with GM. And then finally for today, we do have a bit of news on the EV tax credit in terms of the European Union's role there. We've talked before about the pushback on the structure from Europe. We're obviously still waiting for final guidelines for how this is all going to be set up. That should be later this month. There's been talk of maybe the European Union doing something similar to some of the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act, but for now, the report from Reuters is that the EU is trying to convince the US to ease requirements on some of the domestic sourcing or free trade agreement requirements for battery minerals, etc., as a part of the IRA. So that's been a major point of contention. We'll see how this ends up being resolved. Sounds like we may get a little bit more information on that, particularly relating to the EU tomorrow. One final thing before we wrap up, something worth keeping an eye on. Silicon Valley Bank today was down 60% on the day, down another 20% as I'm recording after hours. Haven't had a ton of time to research this yet, but my understanding is that it's on balance sheet concerns. So it'll be interesting to watch. Obviously, this could have broader implications, impacts on the market, which probably already started today. So probably more to come on that, but that is where we'll leave it for today. So as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. Also find me on Twitter @TeslaPodcast, and we'll see you tomorrow for the Friday, March 10th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.